part of the business plan. In Switzerland, for example, you see that even as a marketing argument, my products contain less CO2 than the products of the competitor and so on. That's good. We go for transparency, carbon accounting, because the problem is very serious. I mean, we have the fourth assessment report of the IPCC from 2007 that is indicating that climate change is there. But we have since then additional results from the science that say that yes, it's probably even going quicker than what we thought. Well, we'll receive a fifth assessment report of the IPCC in 3 or 4 years. But in the meantime, there is no time to lose. And I think that we have already in place a lot of measures, in particular the Kyoto Protocol. And it's a matter now to find the appropriate architecture. We were discussing with Halldor before starting our meeting. And well, what's the place that the reduction objectives have to take? What is the most important element we have to consider? I think that, of course, the reduction objectives are of the essence. I mean, we are combating climate change by reducing emissions, and this is something that is going to happen, and we hope substantially. But it's also a matter of having the right architecture to provide incentives to everybody. When I say everybody, I consider actors in the countries, but also those countries that have to come to the process in terms of mitigation. We are talking here about transfer of technology, we are talking about some financial arrangements and so on. So I think the architecture is also of the essence. And in my view, will be most important in Copenhagen to have a good agreement on the architecture, and of course sustained by the leadership of developed countries that will announce and confirm good reduction commitments. But the architecture is important because we have to involve all the globe, developing countries, all actors within the countries, and provide them with the incentives for action. I'll stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we'll just hear from all of the panelists and then go to your questions. So, Halldor, tell us how you envisage the architecture that José was talking about there unfolding.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon. I don't know if you've seen this, but on the website of the Climate Change Secretariat, there's a clock ticking down. And if I'm not mistaken, we have 166 days left to Copenhagen. That's all the days. But only 21 of those have been set aside for formal negotiations. And the time, you were wondering what have people been talking about. And what has been brought to the table since Bali is a very broad range of concerns by countries. And you have to realize that we are looking at designing a way forward collectively by 190 countries. And they have brought to the table their ideas, their concerns, what they think is essential. And that all takes time. But we are now at a critical juncture, in my view. Now the negotiating texts are on the table. And this is now the time that is left, the 21 negotiating days that we have left until the Copenhagen conference open, needs to be used to put in motion or make possible the decisions that need to be taken. And then that maybe is the most important question now. What is it that Copenhagen needs to decide? And Copenhagen will not solve the climate problem. Let's be very clear on this. We will not in one meeting solve the climate problem. What Copenhagen needs to do is to put in motion international cooperative action and the required mechanisms and the required financial flows that will make that happen. And Eva de Boer, the Executive Secretary of the Climate Convention, has boiled this down into 4 essentials. So I think it is useful to simplify and draw out really the strongest elements that need to be in place. And the first of those is clarity on the emission reductions by industrialized countries. It is necessary to have clarity in Copenhagen on what the emission reduction commitments developed countries will undertake. That is one of the essentials. A second very connected political essential is clarity on how developing countries will move forward in enhancing their mitigation action, nationally appropriate mitigation action in the context of their own sustainable development. So clarity on what developing countries will be able to do in terms of bringing down their emissions or controlling the rate of growth of their emission. Third, and this is a very essential component, is the financial flows and the technology flows required to enable that action, both in terms of mitigation, reducing emissions, and in terms of adaptation, reducing vulnerabilities. With these 3 fundamentals, there is one additional essential fundamental that needs to be achieved in Copenhagen, and José Romero has already mentioned this, is the overall institutional framework and the governance structures that will be needed to take that cooperative action forward. And it's very important that that institutional framework is adaptive in nature, organic in nature, and can actually take into account evolution in the scientific information, evolution in terms of the solutions, and taking stock of the advocacy of financial flows. And so that one can move from this kind of situation of sporadic negotiations by drama, like we have now, to a bit more orderly transition of the emissions from the unsustainable levels they're at now to what is more sustainable. So these 4 essentials together, I think one can say that that would constitute a deal. But what is a deal? Does a deal need to have all the implementation modalities worked out? No, it doesn't. But it needs to be clear enough to allow those implementation modalities to be developed subsequently. And so that is one of the challenges for Copenhagen, is to really be clear on what it is that needs to be put in place to allow these things to happen. And a lot of those things come down to, again, mechanisms, provisions, and institutions. An example that many of you will know is the Clean Development Mechanism that was put in place in Kyoto. This mechanism allows a value to be given to emission reductions in developing countries and therefore mobilize mitigation potential there. That kind of mechanism was defined in Kyoto in one article of the Kyoto Protocol with 4 or 5 or 6 paragraphs. That then was subsequently worked out and made operational. Something similar will be needed after Copenhagen. What I want to do, though, is say a few words about what needs to happen on adaptation, because that is something that is a significant concern. And let's not fool ourselves. It's not possible to adapt out of this problem. And so I think I just want to make that clear, that the overriding response needs to be that of prevention, reducing emissions, reducing impacts. But we do not have a choice. We also need to adapt both to the existing impacts and future impacts. And therefore, when it comes to adaptation, there are really 2 essentials there. One I've mentioned already, and that is the finance. There really has to be significantly, or I could maybe even say dramatically, enhanced financial flows for adaptation. But that has to be on firm foundation, not dependent on appropriations of governments that come and go, but a more firm foundation in terms of revenue sources.